Conversation, so they've got a lot of great information for us. This PowerPoint will be made available via email. Kelly will get that emailed out to us all next week. So, all right, thank you. Here they are.
Well, Jean and I both appreciate the invitation to come and meet with you on a topic that is contentious, emotional, and fraught with confusion, and hopefully we can kind of bring some sense and help all of you make decisions that will be in the best interest of both the pork industry and our exhibitors of Oregon. I guess Jean and I exemplified the definition of experts. We've come from more than 100 miles to talk about something neither of us have ever seen. And hopefully we won't see the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. What I'd like to, I do have handouts today if you want to take those and pass them around. This is a photocopy of an extension bulletin that four of us put together. It's an information bulletin that is available on the OSU Extension website, and so you can look it up there in living color rather than just this washed out black and white. I made 60 copies. If there's extras, please take them with you and feel free to distribute them as well. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and get started. And so what I'd like to do today is kind of lay a little bit of a framework that explains why Oregon is a little bit different than the majority of the country, particularly where hogs are raised. But I'd like to also give you a scenario of what happened here in Oregon about 3 years ago that pretty much disrupted our serene little swine industry, where we could kind of go along with our head in the sand and ignore most of what was going on in the rest of the swine-producing world. And I'll talk about some of the major diseases that either have or could find their way onto Oregon pork farms. And then I'll talk to you this year about what has happened in Oregon, and then finally finish up with what we can do about these problems, both reactively and preventatively. So what's the big deal? Oregon has a very small swine industry. It's really a cottage industry, small farms. Honestly, most of our pigs raised in the state of Oregon are for youth and FFA exhibitions, and this is really the heart of our market. And because Oregon is such a large state geographically, with so few swine, we're really spread out. We don't have the intense concentration where diseases can spread easily from one farm to another. And so that's given us a luxury that most intensive swine producing areas would love to have, but they don't. And that luxury has kind of, I think, lulled us into a sense of security to the point where many of us have become rather lax with our biosecurity. And that's really going to be the focus of what Jean and I will be talking about here today, is the importance of biosecurity, building a firewall to keep these diseases out of our state. And I'll try to explain why these diseases are so important, how devastating they can be both economically and emotionally in terms of the human toll that these diseases can have on the owners of these pigs that can be affected with the disease. And so keep in mind that from a microbiologist standpoint, it's a jungle out there, and there's trouble lurking in every pig hauler's vehicle, every truck, every trailer that crosses those borders, particularly those coming from the Midwest. And we've already suffered from letting our guard down, and I'll give you an example of that here shortly. This is just basically a map of the United States, and it may be hard to see from the back, but here's Oregon, and the numbers on this map reflect the thousands of breeding animals in that particular state. So obviously the big swine states, let's see, here's Iowa with over 1 million breeding animals. That's the #1 swine state. Here's North Carolina, #2 swine state with 840 times 1,000, so close to 1 million breeding animals. And then we look up at Oregon, single digits, 3. So basically, we have about 3,000 sows in this state. So swine are a very small segment of an agriculturally based state. And because of that, we've had that luxury of our farms being small, our farms being spread out, and so diseases can't blow in from the neighbors like it would in Iowa or Indiana or Minnesota or North Carolina. And so the other thing you'll notice is that the swine industry over the last 10 years is moving west. If you look at the growth in swine, Utah has increased their swine population 1,500%. Utah's not very far away. California has a fairly substantial swine industry. Colorado has a growing swine industry. And so, because of the population density in the Corn Belt, a lot of these swine operations are looking at westward expansion. And that may potentially impact us in the future. So, back to swine exhibits, back to show pigs. A lot of our show pigs are homegrown, but because of the pressure to win, a lot of our pigs are imported. And I'm sure you're all aware of this. And where do you think they come from? They come from Illinois, from Indiana, from Iowa, right the hot spots where this new virus is lurking. And so, let's see, where did I go here? So this is just, sorry. This is just an example of one of the auction websites. And you know, our mothers and fathers are looking for that winning pig for their 4-H or FFA participant to buy. And some of the parents, it's kind of like Little League, they really kind of go overboard and they'll spare no expense. They'll haul in these animals from the Midwest, from farms that specifically raise these show genetics. Some of these farms will be very open about the disease status of their herds, and others you really have to pry to find out. So even though we have a very small industry here in Oregon, we have a lot of animals crossing particularly our eastern border with trucks and trailers coming in from the Northwest and some of them coming from the Midwest and up through the California area. So this was an example of what has happened about 3 years ago because of a lapse of biosecurity. And I use this as an example just to kind of emphasize the point that because of our lack of attention to biosecurity, we can really get in trouble. And this case kind of just shows what can happen. So about 3 years ago, PRRS, which is an acronym that stands for Porcine Reproductive and Respiratory Syndrome. It's a viral disease of swine. The swine industry has declared that this is the most economically significant disease of the swine industry. You know, we've gotten rid of hog cholera. We've gotten rid of swine pseudorabies. Now we're left with PRRS as the most economically important disease. Well, up until 1996, we never had a case of PRRS in Oregon. And then a veterinarian out in Scioto diagnosed a single case in a single pig in 1996. And then this disease went completely off our radar screen for several years, actually until about 3 years ago. And an Oregon pork producer got a great price on a boar from Indiana. It was a no sale at an auction. And so a private treaty was made after the auction had concluded. They loaded this boar up and brought it home. Well, this was the source of the virus for his swine herd. And this was a producer that basically made his living by farming. They raised pigs and goats and sheep, but this was really their livelihood. And they got into infertility and abortion in the pigs. And I was called down and I did some, it just because I practiced for many years in North Carolina and Mississippi, so if you hear a little bit of a southern twang, that's the reason. this kind of sounded like PERS to me. I was actually in North Carolina when this disease was called mystery pig disease in the early 80s before anybody even knew exactly what it was. So this kind of was on my radar. I went down, I did some blood testing. We found it in several animals, and this producer, and I respect him greatly for this, he depopulated his herd, he left the facility sit dormant, and then he brought in negative animals and started over. We call that depop, repop, depopulation, repopulation. And it's the most effective way to deal with a disease like that, but obviously it's a very expensive way to deal with that kind of a disease. And so this kind of triggered the idea that maybe we're not PERS-free in Oregon, and with help of Dr. Lee Master, our state veterinarian who was able to provide some USDA funding, we started doing a little testing last year, and this table shows the results. We actually tested pigs on 7 farms. We tested nearly 100 animals, and basically 1 out of 4 of those animals were positive. 5 of the 7 farms had positive animals. And so this was not a random population. This was swine farms where they had some evidence that this virus might be circulating on their farm. And I just bring this to you to show you how something that we thought we didn't even have for decades can just be smoldering and raise its ugly head because of a lack of attention to testing, to quarantine, and to proper biosecurity measures. And so I use this as an example just to illustrate the danger that can come from those practices, because we've got a locomotive headed our way. And that's what we're going to kind of go through next. But what went wrong? How did we end up with this PERS outbreak in the state of Oregon? Well, the herd of origin disease status was unknown. So if any of your fair kids, your FFA, your producers are buying pigs, they need to establish what the disease status of those particular herds of origin is. Do they have PERS? Do they have porcine epidemic diarrhea virus? Do they have actinobacillosis? Do they have strep suis? And that doesn't mean that you can't get animals from those, but you ought to at least know what you might be potentially getting. And so the other thing that happens is somebody from Oregon will take a truck and trailer and they'll drive to Indiana and they'll buy 20 or 50 show pigs. They come into Oregon, and then those pigs go all over the state. Now, those 20 or 50 pigs may have come from 2, 3, 4, 5 different farms. So it's just like a livestock auction where you buy calves. They ought to have a sign on those places that says Disease Distribution Center, because it's just like a daycare for your kids. They're going to get ear infections. They're going to get pink eye. They're going to get the diseases that are common just associated with that environment. The same thing happens when folks go to the Midwest, buy a bunch of pigs, bring them into Oregon, and then distribute them all over the state. So those animals were sent to shows and jackpots before a diagnosis was ever made. So some of these farms that I showed you here were from Central Oregon, some of them were from the southern coast of Oregon, and some of them were from between the Corvallis area up to Portland area. So those pigs went all over the state. And then there was no quarantine done, there was no blood testing done before those animals were mixed in with the herd. All those things basically were a breakdown in biosecurity that let this disease creep in. All right, so going to change directions a little bit and talk about show exhibitions, particularly with regard to this new virus. It's called porcine, and that's spelled wrong, it should be epidemic, not endemic, sorry, diarrhea virus. This is not a brand new virus, it's just new to us. It's been in the United Kingdom since 1971, in Asia, parts of China since 1972. So a couple things to bear in mind. It does not infect people. It does not infect other livestock, so your sheep, cattle, goats, horses, they can't become infected with this. It only infects swine. It poses no danger for people. Even the meat of animals with this virus is completely safe to eat. But it is a devastating disease to pigs. Most of the, let's see, it's basically considered a production-related disease. In other words, this disease has an impact on the swine in a facility. It will cause severe death loss in very young animals, basically 100% in pigs under a week of age, and then as the animals become older, they're less severely affected and more likely to recover, although they may go off feed and have reduced rates of gain, reduced feed efficiency, which has an economic impact. And as of this month, this disease has been identified in 30 of our 50 states. Let's see, I'm going to show you. This is a map of the U.S. The yellowish-orange states are those where it has been infected. And if any of you are really good at counting, you'll see there's 29 states in yellow, but I said there were 30 states. That's because this last week Virginia had a positive case. But here's Oregon, up in our serene little isolated area, but you can see that 2 states that border us, California and Idaho, have had positives. And obviously there's a lot of traffic across these borders, some with health papers, some without. And so it's not that far from us. So, let's see. So how important is this disease to us in Oregon? Well, this is a statement by Karen Richter, who is both a Minnesota pork producer, but more importantly, she is president of the National Pork Board. And she says that this, referring to this disease, has become one of the most serious and devastating diseases our pig farmers have faced in decades. Our number one priority, the National Pork Board, is to address porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. And Gene and I were talking on the way up. There was an announcement made yesterday that the country of France has now suspended U.S. imports because France doesn't have this disease, and they don't want this disease, and the way they're going to try and keep it out is to ban imports from any countries where this virus has been found. And so, does that affect Oregon? Maybe not directly, but it definitely affects the U.S. pork industry. There's a trickle-down effect to every state in this country that produces pork. I wanted to kind of also just mention the human component of what it might be like to go out to a barn and find a pile of dead pigs. This is a quote from the swine producer in Iowa last Christmas. This disease first showed up May a year ago in Iowa and then in North Carolina. And this man, he says, yeah, some Merry Christmas, he said, of the December 19th call from his farm manager with news that all the sows, or the breeding females, they were throwing up. Many of them had diarrhea. The sows survived. They were the older animals. But within 96 hours, we probably had 500 little pigs that were dead. So, for one producer, 500 little pigs that were dead is a big deal. For an Oregon 4-H kid that has 2 sows and 2 litters with 10 or 12 pigs per litter, if they come out and find 20 or 25 pigs dead, can you imagine what it's going to, how it's going to affect that child? Not just economically, but the emotional toll and the trauma that comes along with that. So I think we need to keep that in mind. There's more here than just the economic price of this disease. So this is a bar graph from last April up until the day before tax day. This is past April, and the light pink bars are the cumulative total of swine farms in the U.S. where this disease has been diagnosed. So you can see it was just a few here in April. We hit 1,000 swine farms in October. So 7 months ago there were 1,000 farms. 7 months later it's over 6,000 farms. What does that tell you? Does this disease spread fast? Is it easy to spread? Yeah. And these are in high-intensity swine areas. They have high efficiency filters. They have high biosecurity. You know, when pigs die on those farms, they're either composted or they're driven to the end of a road a half a mile down that farm entry, and the rendering truck picks them out there. They never come onto the farm. Feed trucks have to wash their tires. Feed salesmen and other salesmen are usually shot on sight. So they really try to protect their industry. It hadn't worked very well. It beat them. It's basically beaten them. So what's going on in Oregon? I wanted to just bring you up to date on the decision that our state veterinarian, Dr. Brad Leadmaster, has made. He issued a statement on February 10th. And the statement is here at the bottom. It says that any swine coming into the state of Oregon must have a certificate of veterinary inspection signed by a licensed accredited veterinarian in the state of origin, and that veterinarian must state on the certificate, to the best of my knowledge, swine represented on this certificate have not originated from a premises known to be affected by porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, and have not been exposed to porcine epidemic diarrhea virus within the last 30 days. And so that doesn't mean that any testing was done. There were no blood tests, there were no fecal tests looking for the virus. So this statement is really based on taking the word of the swine farm owner, where those pigs were purchased and brought into Oregon. So you can see it's not a perfect firewall to keep this disease out, but at least makes people aware that you better find out where your pigs are coming from, what diseases are on those farms, and if this disease has been diagnosed on that farm, you really better count the cost of potentially importing this disease into the state of Oregon. So just a real brief heads up on what this disease looks like. It's, if any of you, and I know some of you are pork producers, it's similar to transmissible gastroenteritis, which is a disease which I used to see in North Carolina every winter. The little pigs would throw up, they'd have a yellowy diarrhea, they'd get dehydrated and they die. And as soon as the weather warmed up, the disease went away. Well, this disease looks just like it, except when the weather warms up, it doesn't go away. It's not temperature sensitive like the transmissible gastroenteritis. The suckling and the early weaned pigs, they generally die. The older pigs, they get sick for a few days, but generally recover. It has a very short incubation period, so once this disease gets onto a farm within 1 to 3 days, you've got sick and dying pigs. It doesn't take very long. It doesn't smolder for a long time like that PERS virus that I mentioned earlier. That can come onto a farm and you not even know it for a year. The spread is primarily fecal oral, so anywhere pigs have defecated, the feces contain millions and millions of viruses per gram of fecal material, and that can be spread. It can either be aerolized through pressure washing, it can be spread on your boots, it can be spread on instruments that are used with the pigs, and so it's easy to move around that way. There are lots of diseases in pigs that cause diarrhea and vomiting, and so the only way to confirm that this is the disease that's causing it is through laboratory diagnosis, and the test kits have been purchased by the diagnostic lab at Oregon State. I think it's $35 to get the test run on a fecal sample. So $35 is pretty inexpensive for a peace of mind, I think, if you've got some pigs with diarrhea. So why is it so darn hard to keep out? Why have the best minds in the swine business not been able to beat this disease? Well, first of all, it requires a very low dose for infection. So just a few virus particles can get this disease going. It's not like even the flu in people, where I have to sneeze on you pretty hard to give you the flu. But just a very few virus particles can get this disease started in a herd, and then it just spreads like wildfire. It's very difficult to remove the virus from trucks and trailers by washing. We were talking earlier, one of the ways that PERS is combated in the big potbelly trucks that swine are hauled in, after they're washed and disinfected, they basically pull them into an oven and they bake those trucks the trailers at about 150 degrees for a couple minutes to try and kill the virus. Obviously, we're not set up for that in Oregon. Basically, we try to wash and disinfect, but as you know, There's places under the mats, there's places where 2 pieces of metal on the sides of the trailer overlap, and manure can get up under those. When pigs are scared, they're being hauled, they kind of tend to squirt manure in different directions and project it, and can get in all those little nicks and crannies that are just about impossible to completely remove. Yep.
I might mention that the National... How about that? There we go. Sorry. National Park Board had funded some studies recently, and this virus is a little tough to kill, as Chuck said. They found with this particular virus, it took 160 plus degrees to kill it. So not 140, not 120. It wasn't. They didn't get a 95+% reduction until they hit 160 degrees. So it's pretty resistant to the things that we've come across before as far as temperature.
Thank you. Some animals get infected with this virus. They may or may not get sick. If they do get sick, they recover, but for a period of time, we don't even know how long, because this is such a new disease. They can shed that virus, so they are what we would call an inapparent carrier. They look perfectly healthy, but they are shedding small amounts of virus particles in their manure. And I mentioned it takes very few virus particles to get this disease started when susceptible young pigs are exposed. So, you know, it could be a sow or a gilt brought in. The other thing with environmental sampling, this has been kind of interesting. This virus just seems to permeate the entire farm. When they go around and they swab different surfaces on the farm, they found this virus on doorknobs. They found it in the medicine rooms where people have gone in to get drugs or scours medicine to treat their pigs. So they've been exposed to the sick pigs, and they go in the medicine room. They find it in the boot wash areas where the workers are required to disinfect their boots. So just goes to the point that this virus can really move rapidly through a facility. So what do we have to defend ourselves against that? There is an experimental vaccine that's only available in 6 states, and Oregon is not one of those states. And so, and also the vaccine is only meant for the breeding females. And so that generally doesn't even apply to the animals being brought into Oregon as exhibition animals. I've had people call me and say, I'm going to bring some pigs in from Indiana, but they've had that shot for the virus because that's one of the states where it's legal. Well, it's not even approved. It's not approved at all. It's still experimental, and it's certainly not approved for young show animals. It's to be given around the time of breeding, so that's completely off-label. We have no idea if it's effective at all when used that way. So for now, the bottom line is vaccine is off the table. It's not an option. And so we're left with biocontainment, biosecurity, and sanitation as our only hope to stop the spread. And obviously, it goes back to knowing where these animals come from, knowing what diseases are prevalent on those farms, avoiding commingling of animals from different farms on the same hauling facility, having a quarantine or isolation period, and to be even more vigilant, samples of manure can be submitted to the lab for testing. Gene mentioned how hard it is to kill this virus with heat. We have disinfectants, common disinfectants that are effective against this virus, but those surfaces have to be clean. You can't disinfect dirt. You can't put disinfectants out on a dirt plot and expect them to do their job. They just don't penetrate far enough. And I mentioned the idea that the way our trailers are built, there's nooks and crannies, and even with a pressure washer, it's really hard to remove all of the manure. So the disinfectants work on a clean surface, but they're not effective on a surface that has organic matter. But the common disinfectants are Clorox. You can put about 4 ounces of Clorox in a gallon of water, put it in a pump-up sprayer. That's effective. The commercially available disinfectants that are effective are the Vircon S and the one-stroke Environ. They're both very effective. So again, just remind you that it's not a threat to humans or other livestock. The meat is safe to eat. This is a picture of that man that came out one day and had 500 dead pigs. For disease testing, if anybody becomes interested in having specific animals tested, we can do that at Oregon State. It takes 10 mLs of feces on a live animal. They can send in blood samples. Blood sample tests we don't do at Oregon. We send that away. Tissue samples we can process, swabs from the rectum. And one of the newer tests that's available for swine diseases is what we just call the rope or the saliva test. They'll just hang a half-inch rope in a pen with swine, and swine, being extremely smart and very curious, they come up and chew on it. And after they've all chewed on it for about 20 minutes, you just put that rope into a Ziploc bag and squish the saliva fluids into the bag, chill it, and send it to the lab. And they can do a whole panel of tests on that saliva to look for different viruses. And that's all I know about this disease. Jean and I are here to help answer any questions. And so at this point, please feel free to ask questions. We'll do our best to give you a straight answer. Yes, sir.
Do you know how long, like when you said you found it on doorknobs and other parts, how long it survives in those areas? If you don't disinfect?
It's highly variable. It does not survive well at extremes of heat or extreme dryness. But here in Western Oregon, we have the perfect environment with moderate temperatures and fairly high humidity for all of our summer months. And in those situations, I can't give you numbers at 3 hours, 3 days, or 3 weeks, but it's substantial enough that it can survive long enough to be moved from that position to an instrument or a hand and then moved to pigs. So I wish I could give you a specific answer, but I don't know.
I might add in that same group of research studies that the National Pork Board funded, they took swabs from like swine population centers, let's say like in Iowa, went into suburban and urban grocery stores and took swabs off the floors, the door handles, and found the virus in many places in town where you wouldn't think you would find it, but it does transfer and move pretty effectively.
There's been some speculation that it can even persist in feed that is then distributed to farms. It's not well established. They have found the virus in feed, but haven't established whether, and that was based on a DNA test, so they haven't established whether that virus is still alive and can infect swine, but it has been detected in feed.
So what is your recommendation for fairs to do with the 4-H pigs?
I think I have to go now. Had to take that one, Gene?
Okay. Yeah, Chuck wanted me, that's why he brought me along, to drive and also to take the heat, I guess. I can tell you that this has not been a very popular thing. How can I put it? I've been with OSU going on 36 years. I've been an extension swine specialist for 20 of those. I've never been publicly attacked so much as I have been in the last 2 months. And it's interesting because you have a division in the state between jackpot show exhibitors and producers. I'm gonna speak very blunt to you because I don't think I have to be politically correct. I've got tenure. I could retire tomorrow, so I'll go over there and fish with Tim. So, no, the point is that the reason why we need to think about this as a pretty serious disease is we only, as Chuck indicated, we only have like 3,000 sows, breeding females. I think we're a little higher than that, but let's say it's 3,000 sows. So we have some folks still in the state that make their money and make their living, some significantly off of hogs. They want the disease to be kept out of the state. We have a division, or a group of exhibitors and people that go to shows who frankly don't give a damn about it. And that's very blunt. And I've been caught in between those two groups. My heart is with the industry, it has been for years, and I'm going to answer your question and kind of get into some background. I think we need to be cognizant of the fact this is not HERS, this is not anything we've ever seen come through before. This is a pretty serious bug, and I think we need to be prudent about what we do. So with that being said, the sheet that we handed out is a suggested, well, it has a description of what the virus is about and the symptoms, as Chuck had put up on the PowerPoint. But in the back, we have 4 basic recommendations that Dr. Estill, Lee Master, Jerry Heidel from the Diagnostic Lab, and I agreed upon that we would recommend to the state of Oregon, and we would stand behind those recommendations. And they haven't been very popular. So what we recommend is that, and this is a recommendation, every county can do what they want, but that you consider not having a breeding show this year. Okay? And the reason is because if somebody takes that home, they're pretty much wiped out for now. Now we're going to be meeting next week. Katie was here just a second ago. There she is over there. Hey, it's lucky that Mel got out of the feed business when he did, because otherwise he would have been shot, as Chuck said. I don't know what we're going to do at State Fair. I think we really have to think about that. On the county level, I think you need to think about the risk of having those shows very seriously. I've heard comments, well, we don't have the disease, why should we care? Well, they're knocking at the door. Idaho and California have diagnosed cases, so I think it's pretty close. We have pigs that go across the borders without inspection, we know that. So there's the risk there. Okay, so that's one piece. Breeding shows. Consider not having them, whether you have open class or just youth shows. Okay, the big can of worms is the market program. That's probably the bulk of the hogs that come to the fairs. We are recommending, and I'm saying we because we're all going to hang together on this, is that we can strongly consider a terminal show. And the reason for it is if we allow pigs to go back home, then you need to be darn sure that they're not going back to places where people have pigs. In other words, if they have a couple of project pigs at home and they leave their breeding stock at home and they bring 2 pigs to the fair, one doesn't sell, they take it home, that's a breach of the biosecurity that Chuck was talking about. That has been a very difficult thing for auction committees to swallow. Believe me, I have heard and been called every name that you can think of. But I think that's the way we have to go if we're going to reduce the risk. Now, on the other hand, what I've asked fair boards to do, and fair managers, is work with your auction committees. They've never encountered this before. Pretty much before, with the other diseases, we kind of fly under the radar, as Chuck said, because of our small numbers. So this is all new territory, and what I think it would be a really good deal if fair boards kind of met people halfway and say, okay, so what are we going to do to make this work so that we don't upset buyers, so that we don't make it all on the auction committee themselves. So we're going to make this rule, it's going to be a terminal show. How can we help you deal with that? I think that's what we have to do. I think that's going to be a burden on the fair boards across the state to work with their auction committees. If you decide you're going to implement a terminal show, then I think it behooves us all to work with them. I'm glad I've tried to go to some of the meetings. I'd be glad to be a resource. I know Dr. Estill as well, although his time is limited in traveling, but certainly can be reached via email or the phone. I think the terminal auction show is going to be the biggest challenge that And I guess it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, we should have one, because I don't have to deal with it. But in a sense, we're all of us together, both the fair boards and the exhibitors, that we've got to work to keep this disease out. A year at a time, I think, now I could be wrong, I think we're going to make significant progress in getting maybe a vaccine on the market with the way they're generating these test vaccines. I think we're going to be okay in a year, or maybe 2. But I think there's a real take-home message that the youth are missing, that we can't just hide our head in the sand when these kinds of things come about. I think we really need to be conscious of the fact that we're talking about animal welfare, really, in a sense. So I hope I've answered your question with some comments, a little bit maybe unpolitically correct, but I'm not going to be real careful what I say because it's a pretty serious thing. So. Any other questions?
During our campgrounds, did a livestock show that comes up the first one of June, out in High Valley, that annual livestock show. And I think they turned all that into a jackpot show about a year ago. Should we tell them, don't bring your pigs, if you're coming to our grounds, as for that, because it is a jackpot show?
Well, I will leave that up to you to make that decision. You know, I guess if those pigs are coming on and mixing and going back home, like Chuck said, you know, the auction yard deal, there's a risk. Okay, so the big thing is that, and the comment I've heard over and over, we don't have it in Oregon, why should we care? Well, we don't know that we don't have it yet. I've already heard rumors of young pigs dying with diarrhea, and hopefully it's something else, but there's samples being sent to the diagnostic lab this week that will confirm whether we have that issue or not. But I don't think it's something we want to say, well, we don't have it, so let's just put our guard down. I think Chuck made the point very well. We need to have our guard up even higher than it's ever been before. The Secretary of Agriculture would not have made this a reportable disease. This has really stepped things up. I don't know, you've been in the business as long. I don't think I've seen that for a disease, at least in pigs. I can't remember when the last time that happened. So if you're not aware, a week ago Friday, maybe it's 2 weeks ago yesterday, the Secretary of Agriculture announced that since this is a major disease problem in the United States, is it voluntary or mandatory reporting? I'm not sure either whether it's a mandatory reporting or voluntary, but, pardon? Well, I believe it was too, but we can look that up. Reportable disease means that if you have the disease, you have to report that to your state veterinarian. You have to track movements in and out of affected premises. So there's a lot of things that go with it. That's a real step up in the, in the surveillance of this disease, more so than we've seen. So, I wish I could say don't have it. That's your choice. But if you read our recommendations, I think your answer's in there, that if you have a show where pigs are coming in and going home, we're saying that's not a good idea. Yeah, Tim. Oh, gosh. You know how many times I've had to cut him off over the years?
Regarding the jackpot show, I would wager that probably 75% of the animals in those jackpot shows are from out of state. I don't know how many of you are jackpotters or whatever, but don't take offense to this, but the people that do jackpot pigs are a different sort of person compared to the ones that are that raise production animals. They will do anything to win at any cost. So my recommendation, and it doesn't help anyway at all, past president, worked pork producers for several years, and been in the industry a lot. We've dealt with this before in my other life. I would recommend you cancel jackpot shows, but as being a former producer trying to make a few dollars in the pork industry and people's lives, that's just my recommendation, because it will happen. There will, I can almost guarantee you, there'll be somebody there to give a jackpot show. They have pigs that's been brought in from another state. Idaho is a great state. People be pigs in for jackpot. I know several producers over there that raise pigs for jackpot pigs. And as you noticed on that map, they have pigs there, so I would say, like Gene says, just use your own good judgment, but that's my input for what it's worth at. $1.25, you can get a cup of coffee, so.
I like Tim because he's the only person that's less politically correct that I know of than me. Any other questions?
One of your charts, you asked about numbers of cases. You focused on the cumulative line. The month by month number actually was declining. Can you comment on that? Correct.
And your question was regarding the difference, between the cumulative cases. This is farms, not cases. It's estimated that between 7 and 9 million pigs have died. That's 6 zeros. So it's going to show up in the meat case before long. But this is the monthly total by month, and so whether that decline in April compared to February or March is statistically significant, I don't know. It does appear to have dropped a little bit, and I probably, and that may be real, I'm just going to speculate, that's probably because of the heightened biosecurity measures. The way commercial swine farms deal with this disease when they get it, they take a batch of dead baby pigs that have died from this disease, they remove their intestines, they put them in a big blender, and they mix it up in the feed. And they infect every animal on the farm at the same time, and they all become infected. That's the animals post-wean, they all become infected. They get over it, and it builds a herd immunity. In many cases, it takes about 3 rounds of that feeding the viscera from dead baby pigs back to the herds to burn it out on a particular farm. And then they'll bring in non-immune pigs as sentinels and put them in that herd and see if they get sick. And so that technique has been widely used, and it may be contributing to the reduction in the number of monthly new farms infected. It may not be statistically significant, and it may be a factor of less movement of pigs between 2 farms, heightened biosecurity within the farm. Most major swine producers, they'll have a 3-site production where they have a growth finish unit, they have a breeding farrowing unit, and then they have a nursery unit. So once pigs leave that breeding farrowing unit into the nursery, other than replacement gilts, which may be pulled off, they never come back to the breeding farrowing farm. So they usually have 3 separate farms, and so the likelihood of spread is less than when you have the same workers going from the breeding gestation barn to the nursery finishing floor. So that's a roundabout way of saying, I don't know why that's down, but that's some ideas that I think could attribute.
So potentially it's seasonal, potentially it has to do with herd immunity.
Right. Yeah, and management factors. You know, behind every problem, there's a person. So, yes, sir, way in the back.
The rate is still 10 times what it was in April 13th.
Absolutely. So there's still spread, and his question was about the rate of spread. Maybe the rate of spread has hit its peak and begun to decline, but we don't know if this is going to be a bell-shaped curve and continue to decline, or whether it's going to level out or what. It's, maybe some smart epidemiologist could tell you, but I can't.
Roseanne?
You had said that some things to recover are carriers, so they're like carriers. That could be the ones that we might be concerned about that come in that show no evidence of disease.
Right.
They go ahead and raise these animals, they take them to shows, they have no evidence of disease, but that doesn't mean they haven't spread it to the animals they come in contact with.
Right. That doesn't mean that a 4-H'er animating his dog couldn't take that home on their boots or their clothing. And we don't know how long they remain carriers. Is it 3 weeks, 3 months, a year? We don't really know. But we do know that some animals become established as chronic carriers. By chronic, we're talking at least 3 weeks, but I don't know if it can go any longer.
Does everybody know what a terminal show is? You all understand that. Okay. So, Roseanne brought up a good point that you can have animals come in and still not, still you can have a risk. So, the other point that I think we need to think about is that even with a terminal show, that doesn't mean no risk. Okay. I was going to mention that earlier, but then like Chuck had said, you've got people going to the fair, taking care of the animals and going home, okay? So if they bring 1 animal, 2 animals, that part of it, and I'm not sure how we're going to address that. A lot of education. Tim and I talked earlier about maybe having some foot baths. Well, yeah, I guess you want to make sure that pigs don't die. The thing is that I don't think anything we're doing is zero risk. I want to make sure we understand if we implement if you implement a lot of the things we're talking about, it never gets to zero, because if you can find the virus in a grocery store, let's say in downtown Des Moines, there's a good chance of them tracking it home. But I think we have to be prudent in doing everything we can to bring it down. And I think breeding shows keep your risk up here, keep everybody's risk up here. Just a market program show brings us here, 1 pig, and a terminal show brings us down, but we're not going to get to zero. If we have an animal that has the virus, either shedding it or actually brings the disease in, somebody may track it home. So when you go back and talk to your 4-H leaders and FFA instructors, I guess in some ways this makes the E. coli biosecurity look pale, in a sense, because the public can actually track it around.
Is this the same message that's being delivered to our 4-H leaders?
Yes.
So make sure we
Yeah.
Another question about where the disease is really at. So, is there any data about these farms? So, is this largely from large farming operations? Are these family farms that have 1 sow? Can you tell us, because conditions of raising animals are dramatically different. So, is there any more information about that could shed a light on how this stuff is spread around?
You're going to get the gold star for hard questions. His question was about the demographics of the types of farms. where this disease is prevalent and has been spread. So just looking at the map of the major swine producing states that have the highest prevalence. So Iowa and North Carolina are sort of the epicenters for this disease. And those are the most swine-intense areas in the U.S., so it would seem reasonable to conclude that this disease is most prevalent where swine farms are large and swine farms are located in close proximity.
And is that your take on that? That's kind of what's happening? It's happening on the big farms and small family farms is not where it's happening? Or
It's happening on all farms.
Does the reporting come out of small farms as well? Or
Yes. Yeah. So, you know, a small farm would be 400 sows in states like those. Because the standard farm's 25. Yeah, right. Well, they go to the diagnostic lab. The first tests were done in Ames, Iowa, as well as in Minnesota. And samples from all size farms are sent in and they're checked off as a positive farm. I don't know if the data has been closely compiled to stratify it by farm size or not, but the fact that the disease is most prevalent where there are large farms close together indicates that that's the sort of place that it's most likely spread from. But if you look at where a lot of our show pigs come from, they're right in the heart of that. There are commercial producers, and even a lot of commercial producers have a side business of raising these show pigs right next to their commercial facilities.
The only data that I have found, and it's not data, it's just anecdotal testimonial, in writing an article for the Oregon Pork Producers newsletter, there are two jackpot show outfits in California. One not very large, I think it's 50, 60 sows, and then one, I think they have 8 to 10 sows, and both of them picked it up at a show. That's a good question. We don't have that data, but I guess on the other hand, I don't think the virus cares whether you have just a few or not. I mean, that's the thing.
Could it be that the big confinement operations of the animals are stressed to the level that they're more susceptible to it, and the family farmer with one sow might have a more stout animal that just can naturally fend it off?
No.
Yeah, but what we've seen in this virus, it doesn't care how good condition the pigs are. Some of the show pigs that have come down with it have been, of course, you could say, well, they've been stressed by going to the shows, but they're not raised in confinement. And particularly one person in California, and I have to look back at the email information, but she shows a few jackpot pigs, and she picked up the disease 48 hours after she came home. And that's a small, few sow operation, so.
So if we're going to disinfect, what's the time between pigs? So if we spray down a scale, can we move the pig in shortly thereafter, or is it minutes, or what's the saturation time for that?
The chemicals seem to kill on contact as a safety factor. Are you talking about a line of pigs driving into a weigh-in? Or, I would recommend that the area be cleaned of organic matter, disinfect it with a liquid spray, and once it's dry, it'll be ready to be used again. But I don't know if that's practical if you've got 80 truckloads coming into a weigh-in.
Are you talking about the weigh-in at the fair?
I do, yes, because we canceled the initial spring weigh-in. So that's not going to happen at all. So if somebody were to come to fair and we're now needing those final numbers, and it may or may not be a terminal show, what's the best recommendation that you all have?
At that point, the next day they're going to be all in the same show ring. I don't know that it really matters that you disinfect the scale. Let's think about this with common sense. we're going to disinfect the scale and make sure we don't transfer it, and then the next morning they're going to all be together in the show ring. You know, I'd say don't bother. I guess, I don't know, that's maybe a breach in the biosecurity if you happen to have a pig that came down with it that night, but they're going to be in the wash rack, they're going to be running around. I'd say at the fair, once they're at the fair, you know, I don't know that it pays to disinfect after each animal goes through.
There are some good recommendations on the National Pork Board website about weigh-ins. Just a few very practical ones. Only the owners of those pigs enter the trailer. Usually the veterinarian inspecting the animal, at least in Benton County, what I do is I look in the trailer. If I see a pig that has a dirty butt, indicating it might have diarrhea, it doesn't get off the trailer. And then at least twice a day, the veterinarian walks through the barns looking for any signs of disease. And if any are found, those animals are instantly removed from the premises. So those are very practical, very doable, low-cost things that can be helpful.
You were saying that why bother testing the pigs? Not only the pigs, the people bringing stuff in too. All their equipment, everything is contained. So just to spray it down on the pigs, the whole fairground's got to get down.
Well, I agree, you know, if you decide you're going to have a dog show, you're on the ride at that point, and you just have to keep your fingers crossed because they're coming in from all places, you know, feed coming in, equipment, everything. Just keep your fingers crossed that you don't have that risk there. But I think we got to do everything we can to make sure folks understand that if there's a pig there that may have the virus, they can take it home. So, and Chuck's right, the National Pork Board site has some pretty good recommendations that go beyond just the disinfectant. It's, you know, change your clothes. You know, they found the virus, for example, one of the studies showed that a truck and trailer going into a slaughter plant or processing plant did not have the virus, but when it went away, it tested positive for it, and mostly it was on the tires. So, you know, this thing is like the Wile E. Coyote, and, you know, like Dr. Estill was saying earlier, it's beat us at every turn. So I don't know that, again, we're not talking about zero risk. We're talking about reducing the major sources of that risk. And once they're on the fairgrounds, I mean, it's like letting your kids go into the carnival. You've got no control over it. I guess that's good for you guys, makes you money, but I guess the most prudent thing is to really look at trafficking in and out before the fair, and a lot of the fairs have canceled the pre-fair weigh-in, which I think is a very good thing. Not popular either, but once they get to the fair, then to me, once they get to the fair, I guess I might summarize two major things. One is, as Dr. Estill indicated, whoever is your fair veterinarian, if they don't go out and walk through the barn, they should probably at least walk through the swine barn, or at least the swine superintendent should be looking for diarrhea. Not every pig that has diarrhea at the fair is going to have the virus. I mean, it can be all sorts of things. But it would be prudent to maybe make sure that those pigs are observed. And the second thing is really educate folks about going home and then coming back. That's a real big breach in the biosecurity right there. So. And I think, you know, I've talked to some of the 4-H leaders, and I've also had conversations with the state livestock 4-H coordinator. But I think you folks, and FFA, I haven't really talked to that group, but Lee Letch is on the Oregon Pork Producers Board as an executive secretary, and I think she's got their ear pretty good. But I think you folks can also say, look, we've got to work together. We've got to make sure these kids and parents understand that this is serious and you don't want to take it home so that just, if we have a terminal show, we just bring one pig. That doesn't mean we've done everything we can. You still don't want to track it home. So there's a lot more to it and a lot more things we can do. So.
I'm not done causing you grief. So, biosecurity. On the big operations, it's pretty locked down. I mean, the employees, it's almost like clean room.
Shower in, shower out.
So
You
you
take off your clothes, you take a shower, you step through to the other side of the clean line, you put on the company-owned underwear, coveralls, and boots, and you reverse the process when you leave.
Right. Now, in our situations, our 4-H and FFA members probably do not practice. And many of them are interacting with each other every day. So is it likely that if this disease exists in our communities, that it's being spread around already on a daily basis, aside from anything going on with the fair?
It could certainly be spread, on a Thursday night 4-H meeting when the kids go home from school, they feed their animals, and then they rush off to a meeting. But ideally, they should leave those boots at home, wash their hands, pull coveralls on when they do their animal care, and then go to the meeting. But kids being kids, that's not always done. I think at the fair, where you really have an impact, I think lots of foot washing stations would really be a prudent addition to the protocols.
So what I'm getting at is, at fair time, how much are we raising the risk from the baseline risk that already exists?
Because the animals are now commingled from all over the county, not just a local group with 20 kids. Now we've got 200 kids, then that intensifies the risk exponentially.
So it's the calculus here is pretty extensive.
And
And a whole bunch of unknowns.
and it's never going to be zero risk.
Right.
So,
We don't put it in that
But you can confine the barn away from the public. I mean, you can spread this as far as you want to go.
yeah, I don't know. People like to see the animals when they come to the fair. What you hope is that if you have a virus shed, that they're going to track it to their home, and it's not going to be someplace that has pigs. I mean, we can't live in a bubble either. We can do a lot of prudent things. We can't live in a bubble and say that we just can't do anything. Because people come to the fair to see the animals. Well, that's my bias anyway. I know the carnival seems like it's pretty crowded, but people like to see the animals. I think we just minimize our risks by the kind of show we have and how we run it. I think, breeding animals that are going to go back home is your biggest risk, and everything else, you do what you can to minimize it. Anything else? I have to tell you a little story. I want to end this on a light note. I have 3 daughters, and I have a teenage one left still at home. And my oldest went away to college, and now they seem to come back. She's living with us. And she calls my teenage daughter the pig Nazi. She says, "You are the pig Nazi over the remote, the pig Nazi over the computer." And so I was home at dinner telling about how on Facebook I've been called the Hitler Nazi person of Oregon. And so she walks away and comes back with a certificate that says, "Dad, I relinquish my title of pig Nazi to you. You are now the official pig Nazi of Oregon." I don't think she was too unhappy to give that up.
I want to publicly thank you, all of your staff. You've been
thank you for that support. Want this again?
Don't take it for
Well, that's right, we're trying to protect the industry. Oh my gosh, this is dangerous.
Yeah, and, you know, like I said, I passed over work as president. And during my term as president, we went through a lot of things. We got right down to this sort of one, sort of didn't. Went through several diseases, same kind of thing. I mean, this is worse. And Gene has always been, when you grab somebody out of this OSU to come and help. And no matter what you need, we call you and he's always there. So he's been the salvation of swine industry, working what there is of it. I think he was a flow. So, you know, we should give you a great friend. Thanks for the time.
And you want your $20 bill when you're done? Anyway, if you have any questions, I should have brought cards. Leah, I think you can, you and Kelly can send our email, contact information. I have a swine website, and the Animal Sciences Department is listed there. I've taken calls 6 in the morning, 9 at night, as long as I'm awake. Lots of emails. Feel free to, to ask questions if you need assistance. A whole group of us, Dr. Lee Master, Dr. Pirelli at the Diagnostic Lab, Dr. Estill, myself, we're here to try to help you get through this. And, as I said before, maybe I was a little harsh on it, saying that, there's a group out there that doesn't care, but frankly, there is a group that doesn't care. And we just have to try to bring them in. I think, my goal is we're going to bring them in and say, look, guys, this is serious. I don't want to alienate anybody. But this is serious stuff. We need to work through it. 3 or 4 years from now, we'll probably be talking about a different thing, hopefully. This will be all in the past. It just takes a little bit of difficult times. We will get through it. We'll get through it. And we'll be, kicking around something else in a year from now, hopefully. So I wish you all success in the summer. Hope you get good turnouts, and Katie, we have our challenge next week at the state fair. So.
All right, well, thank you. Big round of applause. So Kelly will get out a copy of the PowerPoint presentation to all of our members. And contact information for these gentlemen, it is on that sheet that they've handed out, but we'll go ahead and follow up to make sure you all have that. I have found Jean and Dr. Estill and Dr. Master to be very responsive. They've been getting a lot of emails from me lately, and I think when they talk about the group that doesn't care, they're from Washington County. So thanks again. So that pretty much concludes our programming for OFA Spring Conference. Thank you all for driving over here. Thank you again, Columbia County, for